past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Well, greetings and good afternoon. Welcome back, as always. This past Tuesday, former Vice President Dick Cheney, a force in Republican politics for over 30 years, passed away. He was 84 years old. The revisers of history and scribes for the dominant America can do no wrong narrative have sharpened their pencils and have been hard at work to create an image of an ideological, strong and focused patriot who helped steer and navigate George W. Bush through the perilous challenges of the war on terror. Well, there's another side to this story, and it's called the truth. What's the truth? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each program, my guests and I connect the dots between the current events and the broader historic context in which most of these events occur. Let's take a quick look at a couple of today's headlines. The Washington Post reports layoffs rise to recession-like levels through October. Employers have announced 1.1 million job cuts so far this year, the highest reading since the pandemic, according to a private firm. The largest reading since the pandemic, on par with 2008 and 2009 job cuts during the Great Recession. The firm's figures show the data includes a recent spate of layoffs at major companies such as UPS, Amazon, and Target. The private company is Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. A private firm? Why a private firm and not the government bureau called the Bureau of Labor Statistics? Oh, that's right. The president fired the director and they've been behind the eight ball trying to skew the data that will reflect positively on a negative reality. Orinoco Tribune reports President Maduro warns U.S. that attacking Venezuela would trigger continental armed struggle. During the 5th Congress of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela and the 4th of its youth wing, President Maduro declared that if Venezuela is attacked, Latin America and the Caribbean would unite in a single voice of resistance, stating that millions across the region would rise to defend freedom and sovereignty. Why this administration is so hell-bent on wreaking havoc here is beyond me. And interestingly enough, to that point, the Senate is expected today to vote to block Trump from starting a war with Venezuela. They are expected to vote today at 5 p.m. on a bipartisan war powers resolution that would block President Trump from attacking Venezuela without congressional authorization, a vote that comes amid reports that he's reviewing several options for the start of a war of this nature. Is this another indication that there are fissures in this coalition and that he may be losing ground? Well, we will find out shortly. Well, the issue before us today, Consortium News has a story entitled VIPs on Dick Cheney, Intelligence Unglued, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, or VIPs, which was established at the time of the criminal U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 to expose the false intelligence on Iraq. They sent a memo to then President George W. Bush on July 24th, 2003, 4 months after the disastrous invasion had begun. It highlighted Cheney's contribution to the U.S. crime of aggression. What did the memo entail? And what is its significance today? Let's talk to my guest. He's an American political activist and former CIA officer. He was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990. In the 80s, he chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and participated in preparing the President's Daily Brief. In 2003, together with other former CIA employees, he co-founded the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, or VIPs. He is Ray McGovern. As always, Ray, welcome back.
Thank you, Wilmer. It seems like a long time ago. I think you and I are maybe the only still going concern that was talking about this stuff 25 years ago.
In fact,
I can't believe it.
Exactly. And to that point, the first time I had you on my Sirius XM show, I may have said this on this show before, I made reference to Dick Cheney as a neocon, and you said, as sternly as I've ever heard Ray McGovern speak, Wilmer, he is not a conservative. There is nothing conservative about Dick Cheney. And then you dropped an F-bomb. You said, I'm a conservative. He's a fascist. And I said, this Ray McGovern guy, he takes no prisoners. That was a long time ago. And how prophetic were you, sir?
Well, it didn't take much to be prophetic. I'm just glad we didn't both get knocked off air at that time. Now we probably would. Maybe we will now. But it was very clear, he was the éminence grise. He was the power behind the throne that little George Bush sat on. And he was the instigation of all manner of evil, frankly, to include a war of aggression, which Nuremberg defined as the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only inasmuch as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. That's a direct quote. Accumulated evil of the whole. Well, think torture. Think all these things that were instituted after 9/11 and after this debacle in Iraq. Just thinking back now that you mentioned all this, I'm thinking that the first major overt grievance that I had about Cheney came on the 26th of August, 2002. I remember it because it was my mother's birthday. We were celebrating, okay? And he got up at the Veterans for Foreign Wars something, and he said, we know that Saddam Hussein is developing a nuclear weapon, okay? We know that, okay? And then he went to the honoree that night, and it was a fellow named General Zinni, a really bright young CENTCOM commander. And he said, now we're going to give General Zinni the award for blah, 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 blah. And I'm saying, wait a second. General Zinni knows that that's a lie. General Zinni is back on contract now, reading all the most sensitive information on this issue. He knows that's a lie. Go at it, Tony. Tell him. Rise to the occasion. And General Zinni says, oh, that's wonderful. That's great. He don't say nothing until 3 years later, he says, oh, I knew that was strange because I had access to all this information and I didn't see that come, but But now I can tell you that one must have been a lie. 3 years later, right? So we called him on that lie. We could see it was a lie. And, if to make matters worse, just the way things work in Washington, George Tenet, the head of the CIA, he didn't know that Dick Cheney was going to say this. And of course, the intelligence didn't support it. So when he was asked, "What'd you do? Did you talk to Dick Cheney about that?" He said, "Well, no, I didn't. Actually, it's not my place. It would be the president to talk to Dick Cheney. Did you know he was lying?" "Well, we knew that our evidence didn't support that, but no, I didn't. No, I didn't get in touch with no." So that's the way these bureaucrats, these actual war criminals, operated. And I can go on a lot longer, and as long as you like, Wilmer. But my grandmother is already speaking to me now and saying, you're not supposed to speak ill of the deceased. Well, we may make an exception this afternoon. Excuse me.
Well, Ray, not to challenge your dearly beloved grandmother, but my folks always told me to that point, you treat people in death the way they were in life. Be honest and be consistent. And so let's just be honest and consistent. Let's start with this 2003 memo that you helped to write with veteran intelligence professionals for sanity. Was a memo that you wrote to the president, and there's a vice president section in that memo. If you would read the first 4 paragraphs.
Well, I don't have it before me, but I have it pretty much memorized.
Okay, because otherwise I'll read it.
Well, as you wish, Ilmar.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll read it, and then you comment.
Sounds good.
Attempts at cover-up could easily be seen as comical, were the issues not so serious. Highly revealing where Ari Fleischer's remarks early last week, which set the tone for what followed. When asked about the forgery, he noted tellingly, as if drawn on well-memorized talking points, that the vice president was not guilty of anything. The disingenuousness was capped on Friday when George Tenet did his awkward best to absolve the vice president from responsibility. To those of us who experienced Watergate, these comments had an eerie ring. That air and others since have proven that cover-up can assume proportions overshadowing the crime itself. All the more reason to take early action to get the truth up and out. There is just too much evidence that Ambassador Wilson was sent to Niger at the behest of Vice President Cheney's office, and that Wilson's findings were duly reported not only to that office, but to others as well. Ray McGovern.
Well, Wilson's findings, of course, had to do with this yellow cake uranium from deepest, darkest Africa, Niger, okay? There was this flimsy report that the CIA wouldn't even deal with, but the Defense Intelligence Agency made a big mistake in giving it to Cheney, and he said, "Oh, there we go. You question whether they're working on a nuclear weapon? Well, that's what they need uranium for, and they're importing it secretly from Niger." Well, Ambassador Wilson, retired at the time, went down to Niger where he had served and where he knew all the people there. And he says, "What is this?" And they said, "It just seems to be made up, It's like, "Oh, no." So he went back, and he had the guts to tell the New York Times, "This is hogwash. This is nonsense." And he added, quote, "I wonder what else they're lying about," end quote. Whoa, Cheney went ballistic. He went ballistic, and he tried everything he could to actually, well, he exposed Ambassador Wilson's wife, who was a senior official at the CIA, undercover at the time. So he was pretty vindictive. He did the only could, and And actually, this comes into my mind. This is also great stuff for history. I should probably write a book. Anyhow, after a couple of weeks, Hans Blix, the chief UN inspector for nuclear weapons, said, I find it remarkable that they are sure, 100% sure, that there are weapons of mass destruction being worked on in Iraq, but there's 100% uncertainty as about where they may be. Well, his deputy, El Baradei, an Egyptian honest inspector, held a briefing of the UN Security Council. And he said, we need to, and I remember, I was watching it live, and he says, with respect to these reports about yellow cake uranium, I had my people do a Google search, and in 72 hours, they came back and said, Mr. Al-Baragai, it's all bogus. We found out that there was nothing to it. And so, and I remember these words, so these reports were not authentic. Now, he's a diplomat, right? So
Right.
Here's Cheney just lying through his teeth. And of course, one, the unfortunate thing about Colin Powell, he didn't have the guts to stand up to Cheney, just like General Zinni, just like George Tenet, head of the CIA at the time and director of Central Intelligence. Well, Colin Powell fell in with the same thing. Now, that was especially disheartening to me because I knew Colin Powell. He lived about a mile away from me in the Bronx, okay? He was a year ahead of me at City College. I went to Fordham. So I briefed him when he was military assistant to Caspar Weinberger, and I was briefing Weinberger every other day. We worked sort of in teams, okay? I used to come a little early to reassure Colin that I was not going to tell his boss something that he really needed to know, even though I had to stretch the truth sometimes. Sometimes I did have to tell Weinberger something I couldn't tell Powell, but we became sort of friends. And then when I saw what he was doing on Iran-Contra, then I saw that he let himself be used by Dick Cheney to lie to the world about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That was very sad. Well, the more so since he was African-American, I would have hoped that he would have been able to stand up on his own 2 feet and represent those of us who are justice people, black and white. And he failed that, and he never really admitted it before he died. So Colonel Wilkerson, of course, knows chapter and verse of this. Larry is a good friend of mine. Let's review him sometime.
Oh, he's a regular on here.
Oh, okay. Good. So,
one of the many data points. Well, so since Cheney's death, and I've been reading all these stories and listening to all these reports, so much context is missing. For example, they'll say he was instrumental in presenting the strategy or creating the strategy to go into Iraq, and then they'll say on bad intelligence, omitting the point that he played a very critical role in creating the entity, the Office of Special Plans, that created that bad intel in the first place. So they seem to always now want to try to give this man an out when you look at, for example, the signatories to that bad letter to Bill Clinton about removing Saddam, and then you look at who signed it, and then you look at who was in the Office of Special Plans. It's a lot of the same swamp monsters. Yeah. Ray McGovern.
Swamp monsters is a good term. There's lots of external evidence with respect to the various roles that Cheney played. Now, let me cite just one of them, a fellow named James Clapper.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know him mostly as the fellow who lied to Congress about illegal eavesdropping, uh, and then had to apologize a couple months later. Oh, yeah, that was so sorry that I lied, and stayed as National Intelligence Director for several years later. Okay, now here's a little vignette. He publishes a book, Clapper does, his memoir. This is in November 2018. Okay, so McGovern knows about this, and all of a sudden he sees that the Carnegie Foundation is going to have Clapper talk about his book, plug his book, get everybody to buy his book, and they tell me what time and where. So, as was my custom when I lived in Washington, I hustled down there, got there a half hour early, paid this $27 that I had to, got the book, went into the men's room, and pieced through it real quick to the index. What would he say about Iraq? Why would I be interested in that? Because he was the head of the Defense Department agency called the National Imagery Interpretation Center, okay, something like that. And they were in charge of evaluating all the satellite imagery, not only photography, radar, infrared, multispectral. By that time, we had the whole
Mhm.
9 yards, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So he was in the position of being responsible for analyzing all this imagery. And so he writes this book, and I'm looking, oh, wow. And I read a little bit, and then I challenge him. When the Q&A came, I said, Mr. Clapper, you write in your book that Dick Cheney was leaning on you so hard and your analysts to find weapons of mass destruction, you running the agency that would be most likely to find them through satellite collection, that you and your subordinates finally identified 100 suspect sites, and he was delighted about that. But then, says Clapper in his book, I admit that I share the blame for this, but we were under such pressure from Cheney that, quote, we found things that weren't really there. He writes this in his book. So I challenge him. I say, Mr. Cheney, Mr. Clapper, you admit that in Iraq, you found things that weren't really there. I mean, I think that's bad enough, but now you have to answer for Russiagate. Russiagate, there was no real evidence that Russia interfered with the 2016 election. There was no Russian hack of the DNC emails. You know that now. We all know that. Was this a repeat performance? Did you find things like Russian hacking that weren't really there? And he says, well, I'm sure that. I said, well, we were sure too, because we have two former inspectors, and I'm sorry, two former technical directors from the NSA, now retired, that know chapter and verse about all this. We've talked to them, they've published, and now we have sworn testimony from the head of CrowdStrike, the cyber firm that was supposed to do the forensics on those very damaging DNC emails, damaging to Hillary Clinton, of course. And they said there's no technical evidence of any hacking, not by Russia, not by anybody else. So that was the scene there. Now, Clapper, I think, will be in line for indictment now, just as John Brennan, one of his co-conspirators, is. James Comey is going to be tried in a couple of weeks, if memory serves, head of the CIA, head of the FBI. And one thing I learned, this is relevant here, one thing I learned just yesterday was that there are handwritten notes the former head of the FBI,
Mhm. Clapper?
Clapper. No,
Uh-huh.
not Clapper, but James Comey.
Oh, Comey. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Comey. I'm sorry.
Where he's saying that, sure, I directed this guy to leak, yeah, and sure, Hillary started this whole thing, and I'm really looking to I'm going to want to work for Hillary Clinton. So, why did that ring a bell with me? Well, because Comey is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He wrote a book about 2 years after all this, and he says in the book, we were operating, that is, when he was head of the FBI, we were operating in an environment in which Hillary Rodham Clinton was sure to be the next president of the United States, period, end quote, okay? Well, if you're operating in that kind of environment, you're going to take all kinds of liberties with the law, with the regulations, with the truth, okay? And now we see handwritten notes that, yeah, not only that, but he hoped to serve Hillary Clinton in her administration. He wanted to be Attorney General, I guess, or maybe the Pope. No, the Pope is not on. Well, anyhow, he wanted to be a real buckety muck, as my grandmother would say, higher than the FBI. And there were all kinds of people that fully expected Hillary Clinton to win. So, what I've been saying for all these, ever since I read this book, and you have to read these things if you're, ever since he said, I was operating in this environment, it was very clear that he felt very confident he would never be uncovered. He would never be indicted. My God, he would never be convicted or put to prison. I think he'll be convicted. Whether he's brought to prison, I don't give a rat's patootie about whether he goes to prison. But he and Brennan and Clapper and the rest of them are guilty as sin. I just hope that they can convene the kinds of juries that won't be impressed by these high officials and will treat them like John Q. Republic, John Q. Citizen, and give them their just desserts.
As you reflect upon your experience with Dick Cheney, and some of those other minions and the acolytes that supported him, and you look at the Biden administration and the war in Iraq, you look at the Trump administration, you look at the Obama administration and what transpired in Libya. Do you, for examples, do you see consistent mindsets? Do you see individuals that operated, whether it's Samantha Power, for example, or Victoria Nuland, for example? Do you see similar personalities, similar people in these other administrations?
Well, let's fast forward to this administration. Yeah, there's blood on all their hands. And first and foremost, of course, the fact that without U.S. support, Israel could not be committing genocide.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought that my country would be enabling, supporting, funding, encouraging genocide and forced starvation.
Mm-hmm.
My God. Okay. Now, are there precedents for this? Well, yeah, we know about the one during World War II, right? And it's just really hard to cope with these things. When I think about this, and I think, wow, how can American citizens, with the availability of iPhones and all kinds of images coming from the genocide in Gaza, how can we just sit down and tolerate that? I mean, this is beyond the pale. When I was little, okay, and when I was alive during all of World War II, but when I got sort of to be an adolescent after the war was over, I heard all these stories about what happened to those Jews, okay, the first Holocaust. And so in 1948, here I am, 9 years old, Wilmer, and all of a sudden I'm told that the Jews finally have a homeland. They found a land without any people, or a
A
people
people without a land.
without a land. Okay, and I lived in the Bronx. Okay, there were big parades up and down the Grand Concourse. There were all kinds of rejoicing. The Jews they have their own country now. Oh, isn't it great? Okay, nobody told me that there were 750,000 Palestinians living on that land who were brutally either slaughtered or driven into places like Gaza. No one told me that. And I didn't learn that until many years later. A little footnote here. We talked about Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
When people got confused about no weapons of mass destruction and the fact that although the administration of George W. Bush advertised the fact that Saddam Hussein had ties with al-Qaeda, sort of implicating Saddam Hussein with the 9/11, right?
Mm-hmm.
When that all turned to be false, John Conyers called a meeting of his committee there in the Congress, and I was asked to testify. And after all this testimony about all the reasons why it wasn't, all the reasons that were not valid, one of the congressmen, they were all Democrats, he asked me, so Mr. McGovern, we hear all this, what was the reason? And what was the reason why we went into Iraq? And I said, well, I use kind of an acronym, OIL, okay? O for oil, I for Israel, and Wilmer, as soon as I said Israel, there were tremors all over these Democratic congressmen, And then I said L for logistics, the permanent military bases that we coveted there. So in those days, I thought it was sort of a equilateral triangle here. 33% Israel, 33% oil, 30% the base. But now I no longer think that. What I've learned since, it was mostly Israel, okay? It was mostly Israelis that were crawling all over the Pentagon without any even having to sign in, for God's sake. And it was the Israelis that said, look, you get rid of Saddam Hussein, this would be a great first step, and then we can work on the other countries like Iran and Syria and, Lebanon and, what's left of the occupied territory. So yeah, that's how insidious it was. And there's lots of evidence that the Israelis played the major role here. And what they wanted was to eliminate Saddam Hussein as any possible threat, whether he had nuclear weapons or not. And they knew not only that he didn't have any, but that he was not even working on them. That was all, as I pointed out before, a big bull-faced lie. But it succeeded. And what happened? Well, the poor Iraqi people suffered, maybe 1 million people dead because of that. And Dick Cheney decided, well, he'd like to torture people. So he told George Tenet, torture people. And George Tenet said, you mean torture people? Yeah, torture people. What do you mean? Well, we'll have a little meeting in the White House Situation Room, and we'll have the Rumsfeld, and we'll have the Joint Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. We'll have the CIA. We'll have the Colin Powell from State, and we'll demonstrate which torture techniques might be more appropriate for each of the captives that we have rendered to these off-country sites. My God, that was going on. So a black mark on U.S. history. And Cheney, of course, was in the forefront of defending torture. And even Obama, for God's sake, even Obama, when the Senate Intelligence Committee came up with an exhaustive investigation of the fact that the CIA lied about torturing, about the effects that the torture had, there was no success at all. And the fact that they kept lying about it, when that came out, Obama did everything he could to prevent its publication before he went out into the western sunset. Luckily, there was one person that showed some guts, and that was Dianne Feinstein. She got that thing published, even in its sanitized form. It's an indictment of the U.S. government. And the CIA, which simply saluted and said, yeah, we'll find we'll find the scientists that say torture is good. And worst of all, the queen of torture, what was her name? Gina
Gina
Haspel.
Haspel,
Yeah.
Bloody Gina.
Yeah. Now, when I used to do this all the time in Washington. When she was before the Senate Intelligence Committee for confirmation as the new head of the CIA, I couldn't abide that, right?
Mhm.
So I dressed up real smart, and I didn't sit near code pink or anything like that. I got a really good seat there in the balcony. And when these Democrats started pussyfooting around, oh, but okay, but it's secret. Now, Gina, did you waterboard those people? Oh, I can't tell you. We'll have to go. So I had to get up and call her out and say, look, you tortured. It's on the record. We know about that, of course. That was one of my worst nights there. The Capitol Police were very nice.
Yeah, they took it to you pretty good. I remember that.
Yeah, they were not nice to me. So I had it coming, I guess. But so she becomes the director of CIA. And the hard part, Wilmer, was watching my old friends file in. Used to be good guys. Not Brendan. He was never a good guy. But I won't name the other names. But they came in fully in support of Gina Haspel, who everybody knew ran the first offsite there, the first secret site where people were waterboarded. One of them 150 times. And, what was going on here? Well, it was the corruption of the whole system. And it was Cheney and his descendants that were able to prevent this. And of course, it was just too much to let this all out. So Gina Haspel, oh man, she would be the one that had a good record for destroying records, destroying videotapes, destroying everything. And she got away with it even under Trump for his first term. So we'll see whether there's anything left in the FBI secret rooms that Cash Patel has been able to access. We'll see if there's anything left.
You're just talking about Cheney and torture. That reminds me of the Meet the Press interview. The late Tim Russert is interviewing Cheney, and Cheney leans in. And, we had to go to the dark side. We had to do some things on the dark side. And Russert didn't press it. Anyway, that just came to mind.
No, that was the hard part. That Russert, good reputation, didn't deserve that good reputation because he had no guts. He knew which end is up. I know he's a kind of a man of faith, but you can make exceptions if you get up so high that you can't see integrity anymore. Sorry about that.
No. Vips has another memo. What wider war in Venezuela would bring. Russia and possibly even China would feel obligated to enhance military support in response to a missile, air, or even drone strike on sovereign Venezuelan territory. Escalation would be almost inevitable. And if I'm naive here, please set me straight. But I've listened for the last probably 5 or 6 years that Maduro is a dictator. Maduro padded the election. Maduro is evil. But when I speak to Venezuelans, what they tell me is he was democratically elected. The late President Jimmy Carter, who went a number of years ago and was a election monitor for elections in Venezuela, told us that the Venezuelan elections are the freest and fairest elections he's ever seen. I know other, such as Professor Dan Kovalik, who was an election observer there. Garland Nixon, I believe, was an election observer there. They all came back and said the same thing. Free and fair. Now, you may not like Maduro's politics, but Venezuela is a democracy, no matter what Maria Corina Machado wants to tell you, and what Barack Obama wants to validate as far as she is concerned. So your VIP, your VIP's memo on Venezuela and what this war could take us to.
And one more, let me say first that I've had a personal encounter with Maduro.
Okay.
When I was with Oliver Stone in Moscow for the celebrations of the victory in Europe 80 years ago, he was one of the distinguished guests. And by chance, I had a chance to meet him in the lobby of a hotel. Okay.
Mhm.
I was with some Venezuelan diplomats, and of course, I got a chance to shake his hand. And suffice it to say that his hand, I got a pretty big hand, all right? His hand was 3 times the size of my hand. I mean, the guy is imposing. The guy, so that's sort of irrelevant in a sense, but I get a sense of the guy, a good presence, and he felt quite at home. Okay, now, what have we done to Maduro? Well, what we tried to do to Chavez. At one point, when he was speaking in an open
Mhm.
forum, that we tried to assassinate him with a drone. We
With a
just
drone,
missed.
right.
Yeah, we good. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that Venezuela, of course, sits on the richest oil deposits in the whole world. Okay, there may be more and more, I guess, or something like. But on this planet, he's got the richest oil deposits, so that makes a big difference. And he's not subservient to the U.S. like many Latin American people are, dictators or whatever. So they've been sanctioning Venezuela for a lot of years, and that's hurt. And so there are a lot of Venezuelans that are, saying, "Oh, couldn't we get rid of these sanctions and so forth?" So there is a segment of the population there that would welcome something different from what Maduro has had to suffer through, and that's a problem because the smart people on the operations side of the CIA, I could just see them telling Trump, "Look, leave this to us. We can handle this. We send the Marines in for just a little landing, and then we come in behind and we kidnap Maduro and we try him as a criminal for drug." I can see it all happening. You know why? Because I saw it before. In 1961, that's what these same guys, same stripes, told President Kennedy. We got this Bay of Pigs thing going. We'll land these people on the Bay of Pigs, and man, there's going to be insurrection in Cuba, and Castro's going to fall. And Kennedy says, "Really?" And say, "Yeah, really. That's what we say. We're the CIA, and we say that. We know all about this." Now, guess what? Kennedy, after the debacle, after he acted in accord with what he had warned, namely, "All right, you guys want to do this? I'm not sure it's a good idea, but don't expect any U.S. armed forces to support you. We're not going to do that." Well, they thought they could mousetrap him into doing that anyway. He stuck to his guns. Okay. After that was all over, JFK says, we need to look into what the hell happened here. I mean, I'd like to scatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces into the winds, but let's find out. Hey, Arthur Schlesinger, you're a historian. Could you spend a couple months just looking into how the hell this thing happened? And guess what Arthur Schlesinger found out? He found out that the analysis division, the so-called Deputy Director for Intelligence, Ray Klein at the time, I served under him in Germany later, much later in his career, and he and his people were kept completely out of the line with respect to this invasion of the Bay of Pigs. They were never asked. They were never told about the operation, and then they were never asked for their opinion. What will happen? Will Castro really fall? Will there be an insurrection like the operatives say? Never asked. And Schlesinger wrote this memo. We have the memo now to John Kennedy. This is a hell of a way to run a railroad when you have the analysts who I found out later, says Schlesinger, who would have never said, hey, you kidding me? Castro will probably be on the next tank or artillery piece gunning down these guys on the beach, which is exactly what happened. So here we have another case. The operatives they have all the money and they have all the influence. They have the president's ear, and people like Rubio, oh man, would he love to do this? Okay, so Rubio's running the national security apparatus. He's not only Secretary of State, he's assistant to the president for national security affairs. So he's the bottleneck. Now, even if you have honest analysts in the CIA saying, this is cockamamie, this is a really stupid idea to start a war with Venezuela, it'd be another Vietnam. Even if somebody says that in the CIA, well, who does it go to? To go to Trump? No, it doesn't go to Trump. It goes to the National Security Advisor. And who's that? Oh, that's Marco Rubio. And would he send it to the president? Oh, this is a bad idea, they tell me. No, he just keeps it, he puts it in the bottom of his safe. So that's what the kind of stuff that we have going on now. And we, veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, I have to tell you, when the situation, you talked about a vote later tonight, right?
Yes.
Well, we decided a couple of days ago, we really needed to do this memo. Okay. The memo says, look, Mr. President and Congress, look for honest analysis on this. Don't be mousetrapped into doing this stupid thing. Okay. So luckily, as often happens, a really good analyst, former, who was actually the chief intelligence analyst for the whole community, the whole intelligence community, Fulton Armstrong. I asked him, Fulton, you could do this in a couple hours. Could you give us a memo? He did, night before last. We sent it around to the VIPS yesterday morning and was published yesterday evening. Why? Well, because there's a vote tomorrow. So that's the idea of intelligence. You try to make it policy influence or policy connected. In other words, the grist upon which policy can be made if it's accurate. And then you try to do it in a timely way. We're the only ones that can do that, and we can do that overnight, as we just showed. So that memo is out there. It's available to, well, this is a hope. It's available to people who are really interested. If there's anybody really interested in Congress, or anybody interested in the Defense Department, they'll see what we think, we analysts, even though we're sort of retired analysts, they'll see the kind of information that John Kennedy was deprived of because his analysts didn't even know what was going on and didn't have a chance to weigh in and say, this is really stupid, don't do it. We did last night, okay? It's out there, consortiumnews.com.
Yes.
We had 17 signatories, including Fulton Armstrong. When people see what we're doing, they gravitate toward us. Fulton is the best guy in the world. He voted strongly against the Iraq episode. He was a very senior guy, and now he teaches at AU, and so he did this on the back of an envelope on his way home, I guess, but it was a really good memo. Please read it. It's on consortiumnews.com.
You mentioned the Bay of Pigs and Kennedy as it related to Cuba. Well, there was what's known as the Bay of Piglets in Venezuela when a group of mercenaries, CIA, some of them credentialed, were trying to go into Venezuela and kidnap or assassinate Maduro, and they were caught by Venezuelan fishermen. So I just bring that when you mentioned the Bay of Pigs, as soon as you said that, and Castro, then the Bay of Piglets and Maduro just popped into my head. So once again, because the show is connecting the dots, these are dots that we have to connect.
Yeah, and Wilmer, those fishermen were not carrying drugs.
Well, that's why they didn't sink their boat.
Yeah, that's crazy. This was John Bolton's idea, not Marco Rubio, but Marco Rubio has a similar idea now. It's crazy stuff, okay? And the difference this time is that you've heard me say this many times, that there's been a tectonic shift in the world correlation of forces, okay, toward the east, toward all those people represented by their leaders in Beijing for victory over Japan in September, okay? That's where the power is, okay? Now, would the Russians, would the Chinese, would the Iranians spring to help defend Venezuela? Well, what would be an outlandish thought just a year ago is not so outlandish anymore. The more so since Venezuela already has shore-to-ship missiles. You know, with all these U.S. warships out there, all it would take is one to get through, and then Trump would be would have to figure out, now they made an act of war. Now we have to invade with all those Marines, and those Marines would get chopped up. And if they send more, well, there'll be another Vietnam that Trump will have to deal with. We try to tell him that as gingerly as we could. Actually, it's pretty straightforward, this memo we wrote him. Let's hope that if he and others read it or are susceptible to sanity, and that's why we call ourselves veteran intelligence professionals, for sanity, there's not much of it around in Washington. We try to share our sanity. Let's hope that reason will prevail. I think it may, because I think the Russians may be warning Trump on the side. Look, you don't really want to do this. This will put the kibosh on every attempt that you and I, Putin and Trump, have made to create a more decent relationship with each other, and maybe come to some sort of reasonable understanding on Ukraine.
Two other points quickly, if I could. One is, this is from your memo, which, folks, again, both memos from the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity you can find at Consortium News, consortiumnews.com. I strongly suggest you go and take a look at them. You say, flying blind into an unprovoked war against a Latin American government, even one weakened by years of U.S., quote, maximum pressure, unquote, sanctions, risks a conflagration that could draw Russia into the conflict and offers zero probability of establishing a legitimate pro-U.S. successor government. We see a classic storm of politicalization brewing in the intelligence community, to which we devoted our careers as a result of blatant pressures that give you the, quote, right answer, end quote, fabricating or exaggerating a pretext for direct military intervention in Venezuela. Basically, you're saying, enough of the bullshit. Let's stick with the facts.
That's right. And, the bad pigs is a precedent. The piglets is another precedent. When these national security advisors, whether it's Bolton or whether it's Rubio or whoever it is, they're out of their gourd. And unless the president is able to get objective analysis, and that's the reason that President Truman set the CIA up. He says, look, I want untreated intelligence. I don't care what the State Department wants to tell me. I don't care what the defense people. I want you to tell me what you think is the truth to the best of your ability, and you have career protection for doing that. Now, unfortunately, the president isn't in direct line now. It's National Security Advisor that can turn the spigot on or turn it off, and the best analysis might come from the CIA. But if Rubio, in this case, doesn't let it get to the president, well, hopefully the president will read Consortium News.
Really? Ray, I didn't know you drank that much. But anyway, final point. Nancy Pelosi has announced her retirement from Congress, ending a decades-long career that saw the California Democrat become one of the most powerful figures in U.S. politics. She announced today that she will not be seeking re-election to Congress at the end of her term in 2027. And you posted on X, in sort of memoriam, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton doppelganger, crowned craven cog created by the machine, naive me. I was scandalized when she refused to impeach George W. Bush for invading Iraq on lies. Knowledgeable VIPS colleagues told me how cogs work and why. And it was Congressman Conyers who had promised during the election that if the Democrats were put back into power in Congress, he would be made the chair of the intelligence, the Senate, the House Judiciary Committee, and that he would personally see to it that Bush would be impeached. And that was one of the ongoing talking points during the election. Put us back in power. We will hold George Bush accountable. And Nancy Pelosi called him and said, John, stand down on that one. We're not.
And we know that because Cindy Sheehan and I saw Conyers personally. And we said, John, you're in power now. You're head of the Judiciary Committee. Why don't you impeach George W. Bush for cause? And he said, well, Nancy Pelosi doesn't want me to do that. And we said, why? Well, she says that it would appear divisive and then we wouldn't win as big in the next election. I couldn't believe it. I said, look, you're head of the judiciary. You don't have to do what Nancy Pelosi. Oh, yes, I do have to do what Nancy Pelosi said. So, I was scandalized. And then my friends told me, look, they have the book on Nancy Pelosi. They told her about the torture. They told her about everything. All they have to do is dust off their little memos of conversation, and she's a dead duck. So she's a cog in the system. I'm glad that she won't be around very much longer.
Ray McGovern, as always, my friend, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis. And as always, look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Wilmer. Good luck to you.
Man, we've been doing this a long time. Hopefully we'll have a lot more. We'll have more time going forward.
You don't look any older, Wilmer.
Neither do you.
Oh, thanks. I hoped you'd say that.
Take care, Ray.
Till next time. Right.
You got it, buddy. Hey, folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow. We're working on the guests. Stay tuned. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Why? Because this is a rhetoric-free podcast. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.